Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about how to choose a light in general. This will be a basic overview on choosing a flashlight for a first-time buyer or a new buyer. These are some of my opinions and guidelines that I go by personally in choosing a light for what I need to do. I'd like to ask the following questions. Number 1, who? Number 2, what? Number 3, when? Number 4, where? Number 5, why? And finally, number 6, how? Asking these questions kind of helps me establish a general guideline to go by when choosing a light. For example, number 1, who's the flashlight for? Is it a maintenance worker? Is it for police, search and rescue, a teacher, a scientist, etc., etc.? What is the light supposed to be used for? Number 2, inspection of cars by a mechanic, looking for a lost hiker during search and rescue, defending yourself from an attacker or debuffing an attacker. And number 3, when do you plan to use the light? While hiking and camping at night, during emergency when the power goes off, working on your car, searching through a building at night, or during a rainstorm. Number 4, where do you plan on using your light? Is it inside the basement of your house? Check the oil burner. Is it inside your cars for lost keys? Is it around the campfire at night? Or is it 500 feet while diving? Why do you need a flashlight? Well, this is kind of an obvious one, but do you expect to do things in dark via some other method, or do you plan on not doing anything in the dark? Number 6, how do you plan to use the light? Will it be mounted on a firearm? Will it tail stand and be a tail standing light? Are you shooting a video in low light conditions, talking about flashlights and forgot to use enough light in your video with the correct temperature rating? As you can see, these questions kind of lead into how and what you're going to buy and kind of determine what you're looking for. So they're important questions to ask before you begin buying a light. Now I've broken down some categories in which I like to categorize lights into as I'm looking to buy a light. There's quite a few number of categories. I think I got about 19 here. So it's quite a lot, so bear with me here. I'll try to get through them as fast as I can. But they're in no particular order. And starting with number 1, we're looking at battery form factor. These include lights ranging from 10180 lights to 18650 lights, all the way down to AA lights or AAA lights, and different battery chemistries. So for example, we have a 14500 battery here, some CR123A battery units. We have an 18650, AAA light, or AAA battery rather, and AA batteries. So these lights all take various forms of those batteries. Some of them have proprietary built-in batteries into them. Others have smaller batteries than those even, and different chemistries. So the first category, battery form factor. Some lights use C batteries, some lights use D size batteries. So it all depends. The second part I want to divide it into is color temperature. So that's going to be LEDs. So as you can see here in the front of the table, we have a variety of different LEDs and temperatures that come out from the emitters. And LED is a light emitting diode. So the LED type is another category which I like to break things down into. And you can see they all have different tints or temperatures. Personally, I like my tints warmer. Other people like their tints cooler, which allows for more lumens to go out. So it really depends on the LEDs that you get. So that's another category you can break down lights into. Another one you can break it down into is floody versus focused. So what that means is you have a flood type light and you have a spot type light. So for example, this O-light here, this is a thrower. It's got a smooth reflector inside of it and it goes out pretty far versus say something like the O-light here. This has a TIR reflective inside. It's a honeycomb one. And it can throw out a good distance, but not as far as the smooth peel reflector in there and the mineral glass on the Warrior Mini. This has a plastic lens, whereas the Warrior Mini has a glass lens. So this allows light to pass through differently. And in this case, on the Olight Nova H2R on this side here, that'll be more of a diffuse setting, so it's better for up close work and just general front close work. It's not a distance range light. And then you have a variety of in-betweens. Sometimes you'll have like the this i5T from Olight. This is a PMMA TR optic, and it's got an Ostrom P9 emitter inside, and it's a plastic cover in front, but it's not quite like a honeycomb like the H2R or H2R Nova here. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a throw and a little bit of a flood together. And also another example would be the H53W. This has a orange peel reflector inside of it, and it has a mineral glass lens instead of a plastic one. This does give you a little bit more of a throw, but it has a softer hot spot. So you have a couple in-between type lights, or close to in-between, and a couple further on the spectrum of more of a throwing type light with smooth reflectors. So moving along, number 4, handheld versus headlamps. So this one's kind of obvious. These lights are tail switch lights here, and they're made to be used in your hand primarily, although you could argue with the certain accessories that come with it, namely the tail clip, you can probably clip this to a hat and use it as a headlamp. But the intent is to use it as a handheld item versus, say, some of these lights here. Although these examples are not the greatest over here, but this Nitecore here, Nitecore N17, this model is strictly a headlamp. These models are both kind of like a dual function headlamp. You could take these out of their holders and use it as a regular flashlight. For example, the H53, I don't have it in its headband, so I could just use it as a regular light like this. So it kind of works pretty well in that regard. But it's basically the method of carry. That's a category I like to break down into. So these are L-shaped lights. This is a true headlamp. The next one I want to go into is the material composition of a light. So we have a variety of compositions on the table. Most of them are going to be aluminum that you see here. Some lights come in plastic housings like this and this. For example, the Nitecore NU05 and the Nitecore 17. You also have this light, the pen light, the Refined P1. This is grade 5 titanium, and also the Raylight LAN TI version 3. This is also grade 5 titanium. So titanium is a different metal than aluminum, and obviously plastic's different than aluminum and titanium. Some lights you'll have with stainless steel, and others you'll have with copper. I don't have any of those on the table right now to show you, but another category, number 5, would be material composition, plus the lenses too. You can include that in there, mineral versus plastic, etc., etc. Next one, number 6, switch activation. So for the switch activation, you have lights that have a tail switch on them, which activate the light and turn it off. And then you have lights with a side switch also. These are button press switches, right? Other lights you're gonna notice have like a turn type activation. Like for example, these small lights here. This is a Mech Army X4S. You can turn it on to a higher degree in different modes, and you can turn it off. So this is a turn switch. If you remember those old mag lights back in the 90s and, well, beyond that, they had like the turn switch activations. So that's what we refer to as switch activations in the category here. So how does it turn on, basically? Some lights have a non-digital switch, meaning there's no electronic component in the actual switch to turn on the light. Some of them have memory modes. It's like another subcategory, if you will. You can probably make another category out of that. But the point is, there's some switches that require electricity to be powered, to be going through them in order to work. Others are just a basic disconnect and reconnect, switch on and off. We can get into modes later though. Actually, that's the next one we're going into, so segue into that. Number 7, modes of operations. So this typically means like, okay, so you have a light here, right? We'll take the i5T because it's a simple light. When you turn it off, it's off, right? When you turn it on, you get one mode, and then if you double click here, you get a second mode. So this is the method of operation where you have 2 different modes in this light. You have a low, and then you have a high. Okay, so that's a basic UI, which has 2 modes to it. Other ones are a little bit more complex. We'll take the Olight Warrior Mini here. If I double click this twice, we'll get into high mode immediately. If I take it off, I'll go back to regular mode here. If I want to triple click, 1, 2, 3, we get a strobe function. So there's your mode of operations there. There's 3 different modes you can go into. This has more modes than that, obviously, but the user interface, the programming in this electronic component inside the housing it dictates what kind of modes you can have on the light. So there are lights that are memory programmed. There are some other lights which are just simple on and off lights. I don't have any examples of those here today because they all have UIs, or almost, yeah, pretty much every one of these has a UI to it. But think back to the old mag lights that use AA batteries. That's a simple on and off switch, and then you have a focusing ring on it. Moving along, we have number 8. It's going to be multiple LEDs versus mono LED. So what this refers to, for example, we'll take the Nikkor NU17. We have multiple LEDs inside the headlamp for different things. So if I can do this right here, hold this down, well, we should have 2 high CRI type lights or neutral white lights here, or LEDs. Turn that off. We can activate the red, change the different modes in the red LEDs. So we have a for all intents and purposes, a light that has more than one LED in it, and in some cases these lights allow you to do different modes and functions with those LEDs versus, say, a mono LED light, like for example the i1R2 EOS from Olight. This is a single LED inside, and it's just got 2 modes to it, activated by a turn switch. So this is a mono, and you got multiple. I don't have any thrower type or handheld type multiple LED lights to show you, but the reason still stands here. So moving along, we have number 9, internal charging versus external charging only. So this kind of category, some lights have the ability to charge the batteries inside the housing itself. For example, Olight, I like using them because they have a lot of options to them. They include, in some of their models, they include a magnetic charger, a USB magnetic charger, and it attaches to the rear, and it can charge the battery inside. Or you can take out the battery and charge it in a typical charger, appropriate chemistry charger. Now some batteries, like say this 14500 by Lumeniac, this has a micro USB port inside the battery, so you don't need a charger per se. The charger is built into the battery, so that makes this very convenient. You just plug it in here, charge the battery up from the USB battery bank, and you can rock and roll. Other lights, let's say for example the i5T here, you have to unscrew the housing and take out the battery and charge it in a charger. So that's external charging. One more example of internal charging, we'll use the Panasonic X2S. Grab this guy here. You can unscrew this guy all the way, and what they've included is a micro USB charger for the 10180 battery inside of here. So you take a cable, plug it in, charge the battery inside the light, and you're good to go. That's the way they do it. It's a little bit different than Olight, as you can see, but that is a category you can break down lights into: internal charging versus external charging. And then you have different chargers too, which you can break that down into subcategories. This is an Olight magnetic charger, very simple, basic. This is a Claris charger, but we won't get into that right now. The next category would be weather, water, and dust sealing, number 10. So this kind of covers the IPX rating, if you will. There's an IPX chart online. I can't go into it full detail because I don't have all the information, but the general gist is, for example, the Warrior X Pro here and the Warrior Mini, they're both IPX8 rated. That means they're submersible up to 2 meters for a certain amount of duration before water gets inside the light and messes it up. IPX4 rating, let's say, I think this is IPX7, but for example, we'll say this is IPX4. That means it's just rated for like water spray and rain only. You can't submerge this. So when we break that down into categories for lights, if you see IPX4 versus IPX8, usually IPX8's definitely the better choice. And then unless you're on an economy budget, then obviously, buy whatever you can afford. But that number 10 category, you have some that are rated for rain, some that are rated for submersion, and then you have specialty lights, which we could say diving lights, that go way beyond IPX8. That you can dive with them and use them underneath high pressure situations. So the next one is kind of an obvious one, number 11, weight. Different lights are going to weigh different weights, obviously. So this is a basic observation. For example, the GH2 EOS and the Mecha X4S are significantly lighter than, say, the Warrior Mini or the Raylight TI. So, you know, you're gonna, if you're packing for a trip, for example, and you want to count your ounces, and you don't need something quite big as a backup light or a secondary light or a tertiary light or whatever, you can kind of downscale your lights. You'll still get the lights, but you get it in a smaller, more compact form factor. This is especially useful if you're trying to save weight and or size. And that brings me to the next category, size. Some lights will be more prone and useful for like everyday carry activities or just fitting into your pocket. So this is an obvious one too. This headlamp here, the Nikkor NU05, it's a very small headlamp. It makes a lot of compromises. It uses an internal lithium polymer proprietary battery for the unit, but it is super small and you can fit it into things that you normally wouldn't be able to fit a regular headlamp into, or you can save weight. So size is another issue. For example, this M1T Raider Plus from Olight versus, say, a i5T AA light. This is a 0123 light or a 14650 light. This light size is a little bit bigger than an i5T. So if you were looking for a secondary light and you were strapped for size, let's say you have your Warrior Pro X and you wanted a secondary light but you didn't have too much space, you could probably fit the i5T in your bag, or maybe even the i3T in some cases, versus having just two selections of big lights. The point is, size is another category. This is a common one, and I'll go through this one pretty quickly. Brand is another category you can break lights into. It's a very obvious one. So the past three have been pretty obvious, but they do need to be listed anyway. There are many brands of lights. For example, there's like a couple brands I'll list right now. You have Olight, you have Zebralight, you have Nikkor, you have Phoenix, Surefire, Ace Beam, Army Tech, Through-Night, 47s, Jet Beam, Claris, Mech Army, Xtar, Maglite, Black Diamond, Princeton Tech, Petzl, Ecoltac, DQG, Manker, Sofern, Streamlight, Welltool, and many more. So a whole bunch of lights here. I mean, we have the Lumitop, the Raylight, the Olights here, Mech Army X4S, the Refine P1, the Zebralights, more Olights, and more Nikkors. As you can see, there's a variety of brands, so that's why that's its own category, an obvious one. The next one is sort of a interesting one. I like to categorize lights into multifunctional lights. So, for example, you could argue one of the only multifunctional lights on the table is the Refine P1, and the reason why is that this is a pen light. Okay, this is a pen unit. You can break away this unit here at the top, and you can write in the dark with this pen light. So therefore, it is a multi-tool. It takes up 2 slots for the price of 1. Neither is a good item by itself. Like, it's an okay pen and it's an okay light. It's not the best light I would take with me as my primary light, but as a secondary backup option and to fill the need of a pen and save weight and size, particularly in the size category. This is everything built into one thing. That's pretty valuable in some cases. So multi-tool lights versus non-multi-tool lights. Like, for example, this is not a multi-tool light, just a single handheld thrower light. Moving along, we have another obvious one, which is number 15, cost. So as you can see, this one is probably the most expensive one on the table, with the titanium Raylight TI Land version 3 right next to it. Those are in like the 90 plus category, whereas say these two here and maybe even the Nikkor here, that's like your teens, like $15, $17 range. And then, you know, if you go to like Walmart or Kmart or whatever, you'll find lights even cheaper than that. So cost is another category. It's the most common one that most people break their lights down into, and that's what I do. So it's pretty obvious here. Next one would be PWM versus non-PWM. That's PWM stands for pulse width modulation. I don't understand the exact science and electronics behind it, but basically what it means is sometimes a light will exhibit a flickering depending on what you can see. And that flickering will be like a modulation. So that's the light going on and off real quickly. Some lights have it worse than others. Others develop it later on. Some lights are made like that on purpose. So it's kind of hard to say. Just be aware that that's a category that people break their lights down into. They'll decide to buy a light based on that alone. I personally don't like pulse width modulation, but I can deal with it. if it's there, if the light determines to be more practical in its uses for me. So it's something I can overlook, but it's something I don't like to have in my lights personally. Moving along, we have number 17, regulated drivers versus non-regulated drivers. So what this means is, I'll use the H53 for example, the Zebra Light H53W. This light's a AA battery only light. The previous model, which I have too, is the H52W. That can use a 14500 and or a AA light. They changed the drivers in here. A driver is what powers the LED, from what I understand, electrically speaking. Now, I'm not an expert on this. There are plenty of guys and definitions out there to look up, but from my understanding is there's a certain voltage range in the driver that it will accept from a battery. After that, it either gets regulated down to that hard limit, and the emitter itself will only get to a certain amount of brightness, no matter how much you pump into it, unless you overload it and break it, obviously. So what that means is, if I put a lithium-ion cell in that headlamp there, it's probably not going to do a whole lot with the LED. And in some cases, if the driver is not regulated on the other side, your LED will get that much more brighter, but it might push the computer inside there or the UI to have it stuck in a certain mode, and you won't be able to really make full use out of your light, or you can end up just blowing it out and damaging it. So that's why if you see on some websites, they'll say unregulated versus regulated. Don't use, XYZ battery in there for whatever reason. So just keep that in mind. So some lights you can break that down into a non-regulated driver versus a regulated driver. Moving along, number 18, impact resistance. So this one's kind of a straightforward one. Impact resistance, they usually show it on the box nowadays. Some would say like 1.5 meter drop resistance. Others will say 2 meters or 3 meters, etc., etc. What that simply means is the higher that number is, the higher you can drop your light and expect it to resist getting broken and the electronics inside. Some lights, they have what we call potting inside. From my understanding, that's when they filled it with a bunch of gelatinous material to kind of solidify and reduce vibrations on the electronical components, so you don't lose the, so it doesn't desolder or break off solder joints on the board or whatever. That's what potting is. So if electronics are potted, it's a good chance that it's impact resistant. If it's not, then you're basically rolling the dice there. So basically that's a category you can break lights down into. The last one that I have on the list is number 19. It's kind of like modding versus non-modding friendly. So in other words, how much can you customize your light? I've seen some guys on some forums where they take apart the lights and they change out the LED, the housing completely, and we put in like a different emitter in there, like a Nietzsche 219C, for example. Instead of having a Cree XPG2, they'll use a Nietzsche. That's a type of emitter. Sometimes they'll change the pocket clips on them. They'll get aftermarket pocket clips that fit better on the light or stronger. There's a whole bunch of things you can do. They can change the UI, the programming in the light as well. So this gets really into depth. I don't want to go too much into it, but you can categorize flashlights into that kind of category as well. So these are a few examples of what kind of lights we can use for certain situations. And as you can see in the examples, it kind of dictates what kind of light you might purchase or buy. And that's the whole point in establishing a category system and using examples as to what kind of light would be good for you to buy as a first-time purchaser. As you can see, there's many more other options to choose from than what you see on the table. There's a couple of places where you can get good information from. I like to go to a couple places. One of the places I go to is the Budget Light forums. This community is really good at analyzing and offering suggestions on how to mod certain flashlights, and they often have community events where they will develop their own lights and branding to meet their needs. So the BLF brand comes to mind. They're basically community input design lights, which is pretty cool. I don't own any, but they're a good place to get information and see what's going on with lights. And there's certain reviewers on there that go really into depth with analyzing the graphs, equipment, and other items, and showing how well batteries last in a certain light, what the temperature rating is with infrared cameras, and waterproof testing and whatnot. So it's a great forum to go to, the budget light forums. Another place to go to would probably be the candle power forums. I go here a little bit more often, and oftentimes you'll have members who are in both of those forums who crisscross between the two. The UI and the layout of the website of the Candle Power forums is a little bit easier for me to navigate. They do have reviewers on there who go into real depth as well for certain lights. You'll find vendors there. Some of the vendors we have on the table are there, and they check the forums and they read feedback on certain lights. So this is a good place to get information as to what kind of particular light you might be buying. There will probably be 1 or 2 guys who do a full review on there with a thread. You can read up on that and see how well it's doing. And then of course there's a bunch of people on YouTube which I watch and try to figure out what their angle is on lights, and they all have slightly different opinions, which is good. There's too many to list here and talk about, but this is kind of like the end of the overview. Hopefully it kind of gives you an idea as to maybe what kind of light you could buy or use for what you're looking to do with it. So it's a tricky question, and it's a kind of a tricky subject in that regard. So I hope that kind of helped you. Thanks for watching.